I always thought the worst thing that could happen at a house party was someone getting drunk and starting a fight, getting into an argument with someone, or the cops showing up and shutting the party down. But a few years ago, something happened at a Halloween party that I still can't explain to this day. It happened at a friend's house outside a small town in Ohio. I was 24 at the time, and even though we'd all finished college, our friend group had stayed pretty close. One of my friends, Marcus, was looking after his parents' old house for a while because they had moved to another state. The house was pretty far outside town. There were a few other houses nearby, but the area was extremely quiet at night. Marcus decided to throw a big Halloween party there. Around 30 or 40 people were supposed to show up. The house was old, but it was pretty big, and the basement was large enough to fit a small bar and a few couches. I arrived a little late to the party. It was around 10:30 at night. There were cars packed all around the house, loud music playing inside, and people walking around in costumes. Some people were making drinks in the kitchen, while others were dancing in the living room. Everything looked exactly like a normal Halloween party. When Marcus saw me at the door, he said, "You're late," and I told him, "I'm here now, so shut up." We both laughed and walked inside. Honestly, nothing unusual happened during the first couple of hours of the party. I was talking with friends, occasionally going outside to smoke a cigarette, and then coming back inside. Around midnight, I was standing in the kitchen when a girl came up to me and asked where the basement was. I pointed her toward the stairs, and she went downstairs. A few minutes later, she came back upstairs and asked me, "Why is there a kid down there?" At first, I didn't even understand what she meant. I said, "What kid?" She told me there was a little boy standing at the far end of the basement. He was wearing some old-fashioned costume, and apparently he was just standing there facing the wall. I laughed and said, "Probably someone's little brother." She said, "Maybe, but he didn't answer me." I didn't really think much of it. It was Halloween, so having a kid in some weird costume at a party didn't seem all that unusual.
I asked Marcus if he'd invited any kids. He said, "No kids. Everyone here is over 21. Even then, I didn't take it seriously. I figured maybe the girl had seen someone wrong. About half an hour later, there was a loud crash from the basement. It sounded like someone had dropped something heavy on the floor. Most people didn't notice because the music was so loud, but Marcus looked at me and said, "What the hell was that?" We both went downstairs. When we reached the bottom, we saw a few people sitting on the couches and talking. Nobody seemed to have heard anything. I said, "Maybe something fell." Marcus said, "Probably." We were about to head back upstairs when I noticed a door at the very end of the basement. I'd seen the door before, but I'd never really paid attention to it. It was closed, and there was an old wooden chair sitting directly in front of it. Marcus suddenly said, "Don't open that." I laughed and asked, "Why?" He said, "My dad keeps storage stuff in there. It's basically just junk." I said, "Then why is there a chair in front of it?" He shrugged and said, "I don't know." We went back upstairs. The party continued normally for a while. Around 1:30 in the morning, I noticed there was a strange cold draft coming through the main hallway. It was freezing outside, but the heat was running inside the house. As I walked down the hallway, I noticed that one of the doors was slightly open. I closed it. A few minutes later, I walked past the same spot and saw that the door was open again. I figured somebody kept opening it, so I didn't think much of it. That's when I heard something from the basement that sounded like a little boy laughing. I stopped. It was faint, but unmistakable. It sounded like a child's laugh. I called Marcus over. He was in the kitchen. I asked him, "Did you hear that?" At first, he said no. Then we both stood there quietly for a few seconds. The sound happened again. This time Marcus heard it too. He tried to laugh it off and said, "Okay, that's creepy." I said, "Maybe someone brought a kid after all." Marcus said, "I'm telling you, there are no kids here." We both stared toward the basement. Then something strange happened. The basement lights went out for a second, and then came back on. A few people downstairs laughed, and someone yelled, "Halloween!" I figured it was just an electrical problem. Marcus said the electrical system in his parents' house was old, so stuff like that happened occasionally. We went back to the party, but about 10 minutes later, the same girl who had told me about the kid came back over to me. Her expression was completely different this time. She said, "The kid is back." I said, "What kid?" She grabbed my arm and said, "The boy downstairs." I told her, "Marcus said there are no kids here." She said, "Then someone is pretending to be a kid." I asked her what she meant. She told me she'd gone back downstairs and seen the boy standing in front of that same locked door. I called Marcus over and told him we needed to go downstairs. This time, the three of us went down together. With the music mostly staying upstairs, the basement felt much quieter. We walked toward the back of the basement. The chair was still sitting in front of the door, but this time there were small, wet footprints on the floor beside it. At first, I thought someone had walked downstairs wearing wet shoes, but the footprints stopped directly in front of the door. There were no footprints beyond them. I crouched down to look at them. Marcus said, "Okay, that's weird." The girl was standing behind me when she suddenly said in a very quiet voice, "He's behind you." I immediately turned around. Nobody was there. I told her, "Don't do that." She said, "I'm serious." That's when we heard something from behind the door. 3 knocks. Knock, knock, knock. The three of us looked at each other. Marcus said, "Probably pipes." I said, "Yeah, probably." But I didn't believe it either. Then there were 3 more knocks. This time, they were louder. Marcus walked toward the door. He moved the chair out of the way and grabbed the doorknob. I told him not to open it. He said, "It's my house." Then he opened the door. Inside was a small storage room. There were old boxes, a broken lamp, a few Christmas decorations, and an old mattress against one wall. Nobody was inside. Marcus laughed and said, "See? Nothing." Then he turned around, and the door behind him slowly started closing by itself. Marcus reached out and caught it. He said, "Okay, that's actually weird." We looked around the room carefully. There was no second exit. There wasn't even a window. I said, "Let's just leave." We closed the door, put the chair back in front of it, and went upstairs. At that point, I was thinking about leaving the party, but Marcus told me to stay a little longer. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, most of the people had moved to the other parts of the house. I was sitting in the living room when I suddenly got a notification on my phone. I hadn't received a text or a call. It was just a notification from the camera app on my lock screen. I opened the camera and there was a video recording playing. I was confused because I hadn't opened the camera or started recording anything. The video was only a few seconds long. I played it. It showed the door in the basement. The camera was positioned close to the floor, almost as if someone had hidden the phone there and started recording. For the first few seconds, nothing happened. Then, the door slowly opened. A little boy stepped out of the darkness. I couldn't see his face. He stood in front of the camera for a few seconds. Then he crouched down and looked directly into the camera. The video ended there. I thought someone was playing a prank on me, but then I noticed something. The timestamp on the video said 1:43 a.m., but the time on my phone was 2:11 a.m. So the video had apparently been recorded almost half an hour earlier. I showed Marcus. The smile immediately disappeared from his face. He said, "That's not your phone." I said, "What?" He pointed at the phone in my hand and said, "Your phone is right there. So who recorded that?" Neither of us had an answer. We went back downstairs. There was nobody there anymore. The chair was still in front of the door, exactly where we'd left it, but the small wet footprints on the floor were gone. I told Marcus to shut the party down and send everyone home. He didn't argue. Within about half an hour, the house was almost completely empty. We stood outside watching everyone get into their cars. That's when the same girl came up to me and asked, "Did you ever find out who the kid was?" I said no. She was quiet for a few seconds before saying, "I don't think he was a kid." I asked her what she meant. She told me that before we went downstairs, she'd seen the boy up close. His face looked like a little kid's, but his eyes looked like the eyes of a grown man. I told her maybe she'd just seen him wrong because of the party lights. We all left the house. The next morning, Marcus called his dad and asked him about the storage room in the basement. His dad was quiet for a while before telling him that the room had been kept closed for years. Then he said something strange. He said he never let anyone go inside that room because when Marcus's little brother was young, he died in an accident inside it. Marcus's little brother had only been 7 years old. When I heard that, I didn't believe it at first, but later, Marcus showed me an old family photo. There was a little boy in the picture wearing an old-fashioned costume. After seeing the photo, I couldn't say anything. I couldn't make out the boy's face very well, but I recognized his costume. It was the exact same kind of costume the girl had described the boy wearing downstairs that night. Marcus and I never threw another party at that house. His father eventually sold the property. I know there are plenty of rational explanations for what happened. Maybe someone was playing a prank. Maybe the video had somehow been on my phone already. Maybe the girl simply thought she saw someone. And maybe the costume in the old family photo had absolutely nothing to do with what happened that night. But there's one thing that still bothers me. The video I saw on my phone that night was never there again. It wasn't in my camera roll. It wasn't in my cloud backup. It was only there through that notification, and I only saw it once. And the strangest part is that right before the little boy in the video looked directly into the camera, he tilted his head slightly to one side. In the old family photo Marcus's dad showed me, his little brother was standing with his head tilted in exactly the same way. I don't know what was actually in that basement that night, but if you ever go to a Halloween party at a house where someone tells you not to open a certain door, my advice is simple. Just leave the door closed, because you don't have to be afraid that there's always something waiting on the other side of a door. Sometimes, the scary part is opening it and seeing something you'll never be able to forget.